Every time I saw my granddaughter's face, I would hand over the envelope. A small, plain white envelope with exactly $150 inside. That was our arrangement. It's not as if anyone ever said the words, "If you pay us, we'll let you see her." No one had to. The understanding simply settled in the air between us, unspoken but perfectly clear. What began as a single, one-time request had somehow, without my noticing, stretched into a full year. Every month, sometimes every other week, the day would come. I would prepare the envelope, leave my apartment, and begin the long journey. I would take a taxi to the airport, fly across the country, and then ride a train out to the suburbs. I would stand before that house, press the doorbell, and when the door opened, I would offer a small, polite nod. "I've come to see her, please," was all I would say. Then, the door would open a little wider. I would be invited inside, and for a short while, I was allowed to be with my granddaughter. We would hold hands, read picture books, and share smiles. That was enough. It was more than enough. Or so I told myself. But there were moments, unexpected and sharp, when my chest would tighten with a pain so deep it stole my breath. It happened whenever she would wave goodbye, calling out, "See you soon, Grandma." And in that same instant, the adults standing behind her, my son and his wife, would close the door with faces that showed no emotion at all. In those moments, I would lose my grip on who I was. I would find myself wondering, what does it even mean to be a grandmother? Oh, what was a family, again? Each time the thought crossed my mind, I would bite my lip to keep from crying out. But then I would remember her smile, that pure and perfect smile, and I would find myself preparing the next envelope. I was living a life built on a lie I told myself every single day. And then, 3 days after my very last visit, it happened. It was early in the morning when the doorbell rang. I remember thinking, who could possibly be here at this hour? As I walked to the door, when I opened it, I saw 2 familiar figures standing on my doorstep. But something was terribly different. They were on their knees. Their bodies were trembling, and they kept bowing their heads again and again, their foreheads nearly touching the welcome mat. "We are so sorry," my son choked out. "We are so sorry," his wife echoed, her voice thick with tears. Seeing them like that, I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I felt no surprise, no anger, no joy, nothing at all. It was as if I were watching a scene unfold from a great distance, a movie about someone else's life. I simply stood there, silently observing the spectacle before me. What happened on that day? Why did those 2 people suddenly appear at my door, begging for my forgiveness with tears streaming down their faces? And what was I thinking? What was I feeling? During that long year, I kept paying $150 for a glimpse. Of my own blood? I am going to tell you everything now. This is the story I could never share with anyone. This is the story of a grandmother. My name is Evelyn Miller, and I live alone in a small apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. I turned 76 this year. When I was younger, I worked as a bookkeeper for a small local machine shop. My husband passed away from an illness when he was in his 50s, and from then on, I raised our son by myself. We were never wealthy, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I was driven by a single, unwavering thought. I want my son to have a life without the struggles I've known. With that purpose fueling me, I worked day and night. My son, Michael, grew up to be a good, straight-arrow young man. He was never any trouble, and though he never spoke of it, I know he saw how hard I worked. He supported me in his own quiet way. After high school, he went off to college in New York and ended up getting a job there after he graduated. Before long, he called to tell me he was getting married. When I was a young woman, I wanted nothing more for myself than to be a mother. My days were a constant rhythm of work. I'd start in the morning doing the books at a textile mill just outside of town, and in the evening, I'd bring home piecework sewing seams and attaching buttons for a local dressmaker. The sound of my sewing machine often filled our small apartment until 1 in the morning. On the coldest winter nights, my fingers would grow so stiff and numb they would barely move. But even with those hands, I would knit. Every night, I worked on a scarf for Michael. It was a simple, slightly clumsy checkerboard pattern in red and navy blue wool. As long as he wears this and doesn't catch a cold on his way to school, that's all that matters, I would think to myself. I kept knitting even when my knuckles ached with a deep, burning pain. I never stopped. Back then, I cut our grocery budget down to almost nothing. I lived on instant noodles and toast, so I could save every spare penny. Little by little, the savings grew. Just before he started high school, I had finally saved enough to buy him a used laptop computer. I'll never forget the look on his face. He stared at it, his eyes wide with disbelief. Is this really for me? I just smiled and said, "Oh, it's an old model. Nothing fancy." But the light in his eyes in that moment, I can still see it as clearly as if it were yesterday. One afternoon, I noticed the strap on his backpack was starting to tear away from the seam. I knew we didn't have the money for a new one that month, not with bills due. So that night, after he was asleep, I quietly took out my needle and thread. I used black thread so the repair wouldn't be noticeable. As I was pushing the needle through the thick canvas, it slipped and pierced the tip of my finger. A small bead of blood welled up, dark in the dim light. I didn't make a sound. I just pressed a tissue against it and kept on sewing. A little scratch like this is nothing, I told myself. But even as I thought it, a tight knot formed deep in my chest. I never told Michael about any of it. I never told him about the missed meals or the aching fingers or the nights I spent worrying about money. I knew that if I did, he would blame himself. I always believed that a parent's love is shown through their actions, not their words. It's a story told with the strength of your back. And so I never asked for anything in return. I never expected thanks. I lived my life for one purpose and one purpose only, for my son's future. To be honest, I felt a little lonely at the news of his marriage, but I was mostly relieved. Finally, I thought, he has a family of his own. I remember feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. Then one day, the phone rang. "She's here," Michael said. His wife had given birth to their first child, my first grandchild. The moment I heard his voice, I burst into tears right there on the phone. It was embarrassing how freely they flowed. "Thank you, oh, thank you so much." I kept repeating the words, though I wasn't even sure who I was thanking anymore. I was just so overcome with gratitude. The day finally came for me to meet my granddaughter for the first time. My heart was pounding so hard with excitement that I barely slept the night before. I packed a small bag with a bib I had embroidered by hand and a tiny pair of knitted booties. I took a flight from Phoenix to Newark, then a train that carried me out into the leafy suburbs of New Jersey. But when the front door opened, the young woman who greeted me, my daughter-in-law, Jennifer, was not smiling. "Come in," she said, her voice cool and distant. She led me into the living room and informed me that Michael was still at work. When I asked, "May I hold her?" there was a noticeable pause. "I suppose," she said finally. I gently lifted the baby into my arms, the soft warmth of her tiny body, the faint, sweet scent of milk on her breath. In that instant, I felt as if every hardship I had ever endured had been worth it. But then, a little while later, I stood up to change her diaper. "It's fine, I'll do it," Jennifer said, her tone gentle but firm as she intercepted me. I saw a look in her eyes I couldn't quite place. It was something like caution, maybe even suspicion. All the way home, I replayed every word I'd said, every gesture I'd made, trying to figure out what I had done wrong. On the train back to the airport, I asked, would it be all right if I came to visit again soon? Again. There was that slight hesitation before she answered. Well, if our schedules line up. During the long flight back to Phoenix, I turned our conversation over and over in my mind. Did I say something to offend her? Should I have called to arrange things further in advance? Was I the one who failed to read the room? The thoughts spun in endless circles. My reflection in the dark airplane window looked like a stranger, a tired old woman with lines etched so deeply into her cheeks they seemed to carry the weight of the world. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night when I got back to my small apartment. I stopped at the grocery store near the airport and bought a single salmon. dinner from the discount section. But when I heated it in the microwave and sat down to eat, it had no taste at all. Was it always this bland? I wondered, putting my fork down after a single bite. Or is it just that my heart has lost its ability to taste anything? As I was taking off my coat, I felt something small caught on the sleeve. I picked it off and held it in my palm. It was one of the baby booties, a tiny thing knitted from pale blue yarn, the one I had meant to give my granddaughter today. In the stiff, uncomfortable atmosphere of their home, I had never even found the right moment to take it out of my bag. I placed the booty on my small kitchen table and just stared at it. For several minutes, it felt as though time had stopped completely. I traced its shape with my finger, feeling the soft, slightly fuzzy yarn against my skin. How can something so small, I thought, feel so heavy? I gently put the little booty away in a drawer, as if I were acknowledging a silent message. Not yet. The time is not yet right. That night, I lay in bed for hours, closing my eyes, then opening them again. I finally drifted into a shallow sleep just before dawn. In my dream, I felt someone holding my hand, but when I woke, I couldn't remember whose hand it was. From that day forward, I grew to fear the phrase, "if our schedules line up." But I was desperate to see my granddaughter. A baby's growth is so fleeting, every moment missed is a moment lost forever. I called and sent messages many times, but the replies were always vague, always keeping me at a distance. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Michael. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks. "Mom, listen." He sounded hesitant, as if he were carefully choosing his words. "Things have been, well, with the baby and the cost of living out here, we're stretched pretty thin." He paused, then continued. "So, I was thinking, if you still want to come visit in the future, it would really help us out if you could, contribute a little." I listened in silence, holding the phone tightly to my ear. "Like, maybe $150 a visit? What do you think?" In that moment, I felt something inside my chest give way, a quiet click, like a lock breaking. "I understand," was all I said before hanging up. It was the only victory I could claim, that my voice hadn't trembled. After I put the phone down, I sat at my kitchen table for nearly 2 hours without moving. The steam from my forgotten cup of tea rose and dissipated in the still air, over and over again. $150. It wasn't the amount that hurt. It wasn't about whether it was too much or too little. It was the fact that a price had been named. That was what broke my heart. For my entire life, I had carried the weight of my son's future on my shoulders. I had given him my time, my money, my dreams, everything I had. And now I had become someone who had to pay a fee just to see her own granddaughter. I took out my old passbook from the back of a drawer and laid it on the table. I recalculated my monthly budget, my small pension, my living expenses, my medical costs, and all the little incidentals. Then, on a scrap of paper from a notepad, I added a new line item: granddaughter visitation fee. 150 My hand was shaking so much when I wrote it that the pencil nearly fell from my fingers. I dropped my head into my hands and leaned against the table. All my life, I whispered to the empty room, I believed that family was the one thing money could never buy. But here I am, trying to buy access to my own blood. No tears came. Instead, a dull, quiet ache settled deep within my chest, a pain that I knew would not be leaving any time soon. And so, I prepared for my next visit. I went to the bank, withdrew 3 crisp $50 bills, and sealed them neatly inside a plain white envelope. As long as I can see her, it's worth it, I told myself, trying desperately to believe it. But I didn't know then. I couldn't have known that the real pain was only just beginning. A few weeks after that first difficult visit, I felt the familiar pull, the deep longing to see my granddaughter again. I called Michael to ask if I could come. Would it be all right if I came to visit this weekend? I asked. There was a short silence on the other end of the line. Then, it wasn't my son's voice that answered, but Jennifer's. Evelyn, about that. There's something we need to ask of you. The word ask made me sit up a little straighter. Yes, of course. What is it? The thing is, she began, her voice smooth and practiced, Every time you visit, it creates a bit of a burden for us. There's the extra food, the preparation, you know how it is. So, if you really want to see your granddaughter, we were hoping you could contribute, say, $150 per visit. The words hung in the air. I lost my voice. The hand holding the phone grew cold, and the only sound I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart, a dull throb in my ears. Yes, I understand, I finally managed to say. The voice that came out sounded like it belonged to a stranger. After I hung up, I stood frozen in place for a long time. I remember staring at the calendar on my wall, the numbers blurring slightly before my eyes. $150? I murmured, the words echoing strangely in the quiet room. I slowly lowered myself into a chair at the kitchen table and took out the worn leather wallet I've carried for years. Inside was what was left of my grocery money for the month and a few crisp bills I kept for emergencies. I counted them out one by one, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. It's just like I'm buying something from a store, I said aloud. The moment the words were out, a sharp pain lanced through my chest. I am paying for the right to see my own grandchild. Talking. Ugh. The thought sent a tremor through my hand, and I froze, my fingers still resting on the bills. If I pay $150 today, I can see her, I reasoned with myself. But what about tomorrow? How much will I have to pay tomorrow to have her call me grandma? The idea was absurd, but it wasn't a joke. It felt chillingly real. I counted the money again, my lips moving silently. I'm not buying her. No, that's not it. I just want to see her. It's just a way to show my consideration for their trouble, that's all it is. But the more I tried to justify it, the more it felt like I was lying to myself, and the tighter the knot in my stomach became. And yet, despite everything, I took a plain white envelope from the desk drawer. I carefully placed the new bills inside, folded the flap, and let out a long, slow breath. It's fine, I whispered to the empty room. As long as I can see her, it's fine. Was it love that made me do it, or was it dependence? At the time, I didn't have the answer. I couldn't let it go. I had to know. Was this demand really coming from her, from Jennifer alone? Or did Michael feel the same way? Stealing myself? I picked up the phone and dialed his number again. After several rings, he finally answered. What's up, Mom? He sounded tired. I paused for a moment before asking quietly, Michael, about what we discussed, do I really have to pay $150 just to see my own granddaughter? A heavy silence stretched across the line. That silence was more painful, more cruel than any words he could have spoken. Finally he spoke, his voice strained and uncomfortable. No, it's not like that. It's just that, money is tight, and she's overwhelmed with being a new mom, and the stress is getting to her. He stumbled on. So it's more like a contribution. Sharing the burden, something like that. I listened to his explanation, turning his words over and over in my head. And I realized something. Nowhere in his rambling excuse was the word, sorry. Nowhere did he say, of course not, Mom, you don't have to do that. And in that moment, I smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. A smile so cold and distant, it startled even me. I see, yes, that makes sense, I heard myself say. Jennifer must be having a difficult time. And I'm not as young as I used to be, am I? As I spoke, I felt a part of myself drifting away, detaching from the conversation. Thank you for explaining, dear. I appreciate it. Now, you take care of yourself and don't work too hard. After I hung up, I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. Then I covered my face with both hands. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, there was just a hollow feeling, as if something deep inside my chest had been scooped out, leaving a quiet, empty space behind. How long does a mother get to be a mother, I wondered. If I don't have money, does that mean I don't get to be a mother anymore? Guz. The questions echoed in the silence of my mind, again and again. After the phone call, a profound quiet fell over the room. I couldn't hear the hum of the refrigerator or the ticking of the clock on the wall. There was nothing. I sat at the table, my hands resting on the cool surface, and closed my eyes for a long time. I needed a moment to absorb the new reality, paying to see my grandchild. But there was a part of me deep down that was already resigning itself to the situation. A small voice that whispered, "It can't be helped. If this is what it takes to see her, then so be it. If I can just see her smile, then..." A few days later, I put the envelope with the $150 into my purse and made the long journey to their house. When Jennifer opened the door, she had a look on her face that was almost satisfied. "Please come in," she said, her smile polite but formal. Michael wasn't home that day. It was just me, Jennifer, and the baby, existing together in a strangely distorted atmosphere. I read a picture book I'd brought, I touched my granddaughter's tiny hands, and I tried my best to lose myself in the moment. But every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of Jennifer watching me from the corner of my eye, and her gaze felt cold and distant. Still, I said nothing. I just smiled, played with the baby, and when it was time to leave, I handed her the envelope. This, I told myself, was the only way I knew how to show my love now. That weekend, I went to visit my oldest friend, Susan. We've known each other for over 30 years. We were both widowed around the same time and struggled through raising our children alone. She was my comrade in arms, the only person in the world I could tell my deepest secrets to. I brought a box of pastries from a little bakery we both liked, and as she poured us some tea, I told her what had been going on. "You know," I began, trying to sound casual, "every time I go see the baby, I've been paying them $150. Susan's hand stopped mid-air as she was about to take a sip of her tea. She narrowed her eyes and asked slowly, $150? For what?" I gave a small, weak laugh, trying to brush it off. "Oh, well, Jennifer says it's a lot of work for them when I visit all. The preparation and everything. So she asked if I could just help out a little." Susan was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on my face. Then, in a low voice, she said, "So, what you're saying is, they're charging you an admission fee?" I couldn't help but let out a bitter chuckle. "It's not as dramatic as all that. I'm sure it really is a lot for them, having to clean and cook and all. I probably just make them feel pressured when I'm there. Maybe I'm a burden to them." The moment I said the word burden, her expression hardened. Susan, who was usually so gentle and calm, looked me straight in the eye. "Evelyn, do you remember?" she said, her voice sharp. "Do you remember telling me you lived on nothing but ramen noodles for 3 months, so Michael could afford his textbooks for college? Your shoes were so worn down, the soles were coming off, but you kept saying, 'They'll last another season.' You told me, time and time again, as long as my son is happy, that's all that matters. Don't you remember that?" I had no words. I dropped my gaze and stared into my teacup. She continued, her voice unwavering, "That burden you're talking about, do you have any idea how sacred that was? Are you really going to stand there now and deny the love behind all that sacrifice? Are you going to let them put a price tag on it?" I couldn't speak. But strangely enough, I couldn't deny her words either. I didn't even think to deny it. I just sat there, my gaze lowered, feeling the warmth of the teacup through my fingers. In the back of my mind, something soft and quiet was sinking, settling into a place too deep to reach. Even so, I prepared the envelope for the following week. Sometimes I think love is a thing that cannot be stopped, even when it takes on a twisted, broken shape. On the way home from Susan's, her words echoed in my head over and over again. "That's not love, Evelyn. You're just being used." I have to admit, when she said it so plainly, a ripple of unease went through my heart. It was the truth, spoken aloud. But I couldn't accept it, not right away. I couldn't allow myself to believe it was that simple, that cruel. But maybe it was just her way of being considerate. I whispered to myself as I walked. Maybe she felt too awkward to tell me directly that she didn't want me to visit. So she came up with this instead. Thinking of it that way made the weight on my chest feel a tiny bit lighter. It was a kinder explanation, one I could almost live with. I'm sure their life is difficult, I continued, building the story for myself. She must be exhausted, trying to balance work and a new baby. If I just show up, I'm probably just another burden, another thing for her to worry about. If paying a little money makes things smoother for everyone, if it eases the tension between us, then what's wrong with that? It's a small price. That's what I told myself. I repeated it like a prayer, a mantra to soothe the ache. But the truth was, somewhere deep inside, I already knew. I knew it wasn't a legitimate reason. It was just a way of keeping me at a distance. I knew the chances of that were high, almost certain. But to admit that, to truly accept it, felt terrifying. If I admitted that, it would mean I was no longer part of the family. It would mean I was an outsider, standing on the other side of a closed door. The thought of that loneliness, that final exclusion, was more than I could bear. Even if that's true, I murmured to the empty air, if I can just see my granddaughter smile at me, then that's enough. If she calls me grandma, if I can just hear her voice say that word, then the tears wouldn't come, but I could feel a faint, uncontrollable tremor in my lips. I was holding a feeling inside me that I never wanted anyone else to see, wrapping it up tightly within myself, hiding it even from my own heart. And then I went home, and I took out another white envelope, and I placed $150 inside. I began to prepare for the next visit. Even knowing it was wrong, even with that certainty cold in my gut, it wasn't enough to make me stop. I couldn't stop walking down that path, because for me, in that period of my life, the single promise of seeing my granddaughter was the only certain light I had. It was the only thing that felt real. If you were to ask me if I was happy, I would have to say yes in a way. That little girl's smile was a true and genuine salvation for me. But when I thought about the arrangement that made those smiles possible, when I considered the transaction that lay behind every moment of joy, I couldn't help but feel a cold, slithering thing move through the deepest parts of my soul. That night, for the first time in a long while, I stood before the small, framed photograph of my late husband on the mantelpiece. I pressed my hands together. "Tell me, dear," I whispered to his smiling face. Am I doing the wrong thing?" In the photograph, he just kept on smiling, quiet and serene. He didn't say a word, didn't offer any judgment, didn't deny me anything. He was just there, a silent, constant presence, a part of a family. And that very presence, that simple fact of belonging, felt like something from a different universe, something impossibly far away from where I now stood. And still, the next week, and the month after that, I put $150 in an envelope, and I went. The reason was simple. The reason was singular. Because she would see me, and she would smile, and that alone was my only hope. Every month, I would carefully set aside the $150 from my small Social Security check. I was by no means living a life of luxury. I had to cut back on my groceries, switching from fresh fish to canned. I asked the doctor to prescribe generic medications instead of the brand name ones. I even started monitoring my electricity usage, unplugging lamps and turning off the heat until the chill in the apartment became unbearable. I prioritized that money above everything else. Above my own comfort, above my own needs. $150 to see my granddaughter. To me, it was the price of a ticket to hope. One Saturday afternoon, I left my apartment a little earlier than usual to make sure I would be on time. I had left early that day for a special reason. The weather forecast had predicted rain for the afternoon, and I was worried about the gift I was bringing. I can't let the sweater I knitted get wet, I thought. So I wrapped it more carefully than usual, first in tissue paper, then in a plastic bag, and then I placed that inside a crisp paper gift bag. For extra protection, I even stretched another plastic grocery bag over the top of the whole thing. But it was no use. By the time I reached the train station near their home, the sky had already turned a bruised, heavy gray. As I walked the last few blocks to their house, big, fat drops of rain began to fall, one by one, then faster and faster. I didn't have an umbrella. It's just a sprinkle, I told myself, picking up my pace. I'll be fine. But by the time I arrived at their front gate, my coat sleeves were soaked through, the hem of my skirt was dripping, and the corner of the paper bag I was holding so carefully had turned to a soft, misshapen pulp from the rain. I stood in front of their gate and pressed the button on the intercom. There was no answer. I pressed it again, holding it a little longer this time. Still, nothing but silence from inside the house. The only sound was the rain, a steady, insistent drumming on the pavement, on the leaves of the bushes, on me. It was a quiet sound, but it felt absolute, surrounding me completely. A drop of water slid from my hair and landed on my forehead, tracing a cold path down my temple. Another landed on the gift bag, and I watched the dark stain spread slowly, like ink on a blotter. The plastic bag I had stretched over the top was making a faint, crackling sound. Pat, pat, pats, as the rain hit it. But louder than the sound of the rain was the silence from inside the house. The absence of the voices I should have heard felt like a different kind of quiet. A vast and heavy stillness that was wrapping itself around me, pressing in on me. Maybe they just didn't hear it. She's probably in the middle of something with the baby, her hands are full. If I just wait a little longer, I'm sure. I kept whispering these reassurances to myself, standing there in front of the gate, my eyes fixed on my own wet shoes. The weight of the paper bag in my hand felt strangely heavier than it had before, and a tired weakness was creeping into my arms, making it hard to hold on. Please, somebody, just notice I'm here, I prayed in my heart. Then, I whispered the rest of the prayer out loud, my voice barely audible over the rain. It's okay. If you just open the door now, I won't say anything. I won't blame you for making me wait. Just let me see my granddaughter smile. That's all I want. That will be more than enough. But the door remained closed. Several more minutes passed. The world was just the gray sky and the sound of the rain. And then, finally, I heard a click. The front door opened, slowly, just a crack at first. But by then, my hands were numb with cold, and the corner of the paper bag had completely given way, sagging and torn from the relentless rain. In that one single moment, as I stood there holding the ruined gift in my soaking hands, and she appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of indifference, not even a simple, "You must be soaked" on her lips in that instant, a strange thought drifted through my mind. Ah, I thought, with a kind of detached clarity, today's rain, perhaps it isn't falling from the sky. Perhaps it's falling from inside this house. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened, and there was Jennifer, a deep frown creasing the space between her eyebrows. "Oh, you're here. The rain is terrible, isn't it?" Her voice had a sharp edge to it, as if she were blaming me for the weather itself, for the inconvenience of my arrival in it. I said nothing. I just gave a small bow of my head, folded my dripping, useless non-umbrella, and stepped inside. She led me into the living room. My granddaughter saw me and came running, throwing her little arms around my legs and hugging me tight. "Grandma's here," she squealed with delight. In that one perfect moment, I felt as if everything was worth it. The wet clothes, the bone-deep chill, the long, silent wait in the rain, it all just melted away. I gently took the sweater out of the ruined paper bag and held it out to her. "Look, sweetie, Grandma knitted this for you. You told me you liked blue, remember?" My granddaughter's eyes lit up. "Wow, it's so fluffy," she laughed, and immediately began pulling it on over her shirt. Watching her, my heart felt so full it might burst. I had to fight back tears, biting the inside of my lip to keep them from spilling over. But then, a cold voice cut through the warm moment from behind me. "That's not a brand name, is it?" I turned to face Jennifer and gave a small nod. "No, I knitted it myself. I made it a little big so she could wear it for a long time," Jennifer offered. A tight, dismissive smile. She walked over to my granddaughter, pulled the sweater off over her head, and without another word, shoved it back into the paper bag. "It's chilly today. I'll put something proper on her." I couldn't say anything. The words were stuck somewhere deep in my throat, a hard lump that I couldn't swallow and couldn't speak. It took me 2 weeks to knit that sweater. Every night, after the sun went down, I would sit at the edge of my small kitchen table, with only the dim light of an old lamp turned down to its lowest setting. I worked one stitch at a time, one row at a time, relying mostly on the feeling in my fingertips as I guided the yarn. I was trying to save every penny I could on the electricity bill, so I didn't even turn on the television. I would just sit there in the quiet, a hot water bottle on my lap for warmth, listening to the soft, rhythmic click of the needles and the gentle whisper of the wool. Those were the only sounds that filled my little apartment in the deep of the night. I chose a soft, light blue yarn because I remembered my granddaughter once telling me, "I like blue," but I didn't want it to be a cold, plain blue. So I went to the craft store and searched for just the right shade, something with a tiny hint of gray in it, a gentler, kinder color. I even asked the woman working at the store for her opinion. "It's for my grandson, well, granddaughter. I want a color that would look sweet on a little boy too, something soft," I explained, holding up different skeins of yarn to the light, comparing them over and over until I found the perfect one. "I'll make the neck nice and loose so it's comfortable," I thought to myself as I began. "And I'll make the armholes a little wider so it's easy for her to raise her arms when she plays. If I knit it a little on the large side, maybe she can even wear it again next year." And as I worked, with every single stitch, I poured a silent prayer into the wool. "May you keep her warm. May she not get sick." With every loop of the yarn, with every careful knot, I was weaving in all my love, all my hopes for her. The night I finished it, I laid the finished sweater across my lap and just stroked it with my hands, feeling the soft texture I had created. "It came out well, didn't it?" I whispered. "If she smiles when she wears this, that will be everything." Before wrapping it, I took a small piece of notepaper and wrote a little message to tuck inside. "Grandma knitted this with her own hands to keep you warm." After I wrote it, I looked down at my own handwriting, and to my surprise, a tear splashed onto the paper, blurring the ink. The next day, I took that sweater with me to their house. And in front of my granddaughter, I opened the bag and showed it to her. "Look, Grandma made this for you. Will you try it on?" Her face lit up. "Okay," she replied with a cheerful voice, and happily pulled it on. The moment I saw her in it, I was wrapped in a feeling of happiness so profound. I have no words to describe it. But that happiness lasted only for a single, fleeting moment. That's handmade, isn't it? If it's not from a store. With those cold words, Jennifer silently pulled the sweater off her, crumpled it into a ball, and pushed it back into the bag. "I'll put a proper coat on her. We'll look at this later." In that instant, I felt as if my own heart had been quietly, methodically, torn right out of my chest. The love that I had knitted with my own fingers, stitch by stitch, night after night, had been pushed back at me not with words, but with a simple, silent act of rejection. Even then, I tried to lie to myself. No, she probably just wants to wash it before she lets her wear it. She's just in a hurry right now, that's all it is, I kept telling myself. These things, desperately trying to believe them. But somewhere in my heart, a cold certainty had already taken root. I knew that sweater would never be worn again. After we had spent a little time with my granddaughter in a living room, Jennifer stood up and looked at me. Her face was a blank canvas, no emotion at all. Only her lips moved, just slightly. "Can I have today's payment?" For a second, I couldn't process the words. I was speechless. But the question was delivered so matter-of-factly, so calmly, as if it were the most normal, expected thing in the world. "Yes," I answered, and then I slowly reached my hand inside my coat. I remember that my hand was trembling as I pulled out the envelope. I tried to hide the shaking, keeping the edge of the envelope concealed in the shadow of my coat as I held it out to her. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, feeling like I was committing some sort of crime, like a thief passing stolen goods. In that moment, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was doing something deeply, terribly wrong. She took the envelope from my hand, opened it, glanced at the contents, and then placed it on the coffee table without a word. I watched this whole series of movements out of the corner of my eye, but I never once managed to meet her gaze. I couldn't. It was as if she had just said without speaking a word, "This is just a transaction." For the rest of my short visit, I kept fiddling with the edge of my coat, feeling the faint warmth my body had left in the fabric. It was the only proof I had of my own existence in that room. How can this be the proof of my love? The question settled heavily in my chest, a stone sinking in deep water. There was no answer. There was only the slow, silent passing of time. She took the money, gave a curt nod after checking it, and immediately looked away again. My visiting time that day was exactly 25 minutes. When my granddaughter realized I was leaving, she started to cry. "Grandma, stay more," she wailed, clinging to my leg. Jennifer simply picked the child up in her arms without a word and carried her into a back room, closing the door behind them. As I stood in the entryway, putting on my still damp shoes, I asked myself a question I already knew the answer to. Was it a good thing that I came today? After I got home, I quietly looked inside the paper bag I had carried back with me. Inside was the crumpled sweater, and lying on top of it was a small, folded piece of paper. A note, written in someone else's hand. "We don't need things like this. Next time, please just buy something from a store." The moment I read those words, I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't even cry out. I just clutched the paper bag to my chest, sank to the floor, and broke down completely. That was the moment the illusion I had clung to for so long. The fantasy that I still existed as a member of this family, quietly, finally shattered. That night, I had no appetite for dinner. I just filled the electric kettle with water and, when it boiled, poured it into a mug. Just plain hot water, no tea leaves, nothing. The steam rose up in a soft white cloud, and as I watched it curl and vanish into the air, I lost all track of time. On the corner of my kitchen table sat the paper bag I'd brought home. From inside, the sweater, damp and wrinkled, seemed to be looking back at me, silently. I gently took it out and spread it across my lap. It had been made from such soft yarn, but now, saturated with rain and rejection, it felt heavy and lifeless, a dead weight on my legs. Peeking out from between the stitches was a small scrap of paper. My note. The words I had written were blurred and unreadable now, the ink having bled into the fibers. "Grandma knitted this with her own hands to keep you warm." I held the sweater in both hands, clutching it to my chest, and traced the lines of the stitches with my finger. One stitch, then the next, and the next. It felt as if I were tracing the map of my own pain. This part here, the tension is a little uneven. And here, this is where I ran out of the first skein of yarn and had to tie on the new one. These were the little imperfections that only I knew, the secret story of its creation. They were proof of my fumbling, human effort. And they were proof of the immense love I had tried to weave into it. A thought drifted through my mind. If I hadn't brought this sweater with me today, maybe things would have been a little more peaceful. If I hadn't brought any gift at all, if I had just shown up with a smile, maybe my granddaughter would have stayed in my arms for a little while longer. But I had given it. I had taken my heart and given it a physical form, and I had handed it over, and it had been returned. This heavy, damp thing on my lap was the proof. I closed my eyes and gathered the sweater up, pulling it close and wrapping my arms around it. I held it as if I were holding my own weakness, my own foolishness. And in the quiet room, the only things that seemed to have any temperature at all were the forgotten, now lukewarm mug of water and the cold, lifeless sweater in my arms. And then, I made a decision. The next time I go, I won't bring anything. I decided that, quietly, in the silence of my own heart. I still remember that day with perfect clarity. I had arrived a little earlier than usual. All I brought with me was a picture book about animals that I knew my granddaughter loved, and a small tin filled with homemade cookies. The hydrangeas in their front yard were in full bloom, their heavy blue heads nodding in the breeze. As I approached the front door, I could hear voices from inside, Jennifer's voice and the low rumble of my son Michael's voice. I was in the middle of taking off my shoes in the entryway when their words, drifted clearly from the other room and reached my ears. "She's here again?" "Yeah. She said she's bringing the 150. Honestly, she's such a pushover. All she wants is to see her granddaughter. She's happy with just that. It's fine. Just let her think that. Let her believe it's all for the sake of love. As long as she brings the money, that's all that matters." For a split second, my mind went completely white. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, a frantic, deafening drum pounding in my ears. From the back of the house, I heard Jennifer's quiet voice. "It's fine. Just let her think she's making her granddaughter happy by visiting. As long as we get the money, that's all we need." In that moment, I heard a sound deep inside my chest. It was the sound of something vital, something I had been carefully protecting, quietly crumbling to dust. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was just a single, quiet exhale of breath. Whoosh! It was as if a tiny candle I had been keeping lit inside my heart had just been blown out by a sudden gust of wind. I didn't say a word. I just slowly turned around and closed the front door behind me. Staring down at my feet, I whispered to myself, "Ah, so that's all I was." I was really just the money. I stood there in the entryway, frozen, unable to move. Ah, so that's what it was. This whole past year, I was nothing more than a wallet. My desire to see her, my longing to just look at her face. The envelope I prepared with such care and hope each time was, to them, nothing more than a mark of my usefulness. I felt my heart crack apart without a sound. I turned on my heel, quietly, and closed the front door. I didn't ring the doorbell. I didn't let them know I had been there at all. I just turned and walked back toward the train station. On the ride home that day, I stared at my own reflection in the train window. No tears came. There was only a numb, hollow feeling, a deep, physical certainty in the core of my being that I had just lost something irreplaceable. That evening, I opened the bottom drawer of my old wooden dresser and took out my bank passbook. It was a savings account I hadn't touched in nearly 30 years. It was money I had painstakingly saved, penny by penny, even after my husband passed away. It was for an emergency, for my granddaughter's future. It was my final safety net, for when something truly terrible happened, and I understood, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that something had just arrived. The next morning, I went to the bank. I withdrew the entire balance listed in the passbook, $84,380. I sat down at the counter and said quietly to the teller, "I'd like to withdraw the full amount, please." The young woman looked surprised for a moment, but then she proceeded with the transaction with practiced, efficient hands. Soon, a thick stack of bills, bundled in a clear plastic bag, was placed silently on the counter in front of me. I took it with both hands and, one by one, I slowly counted it out, placing each bundle into a simple cloth bag I had brought with me. I pulled the drawstring tight, but I could feel a film of sweat on my back. With each bundle that I moved from the counter to my bag, it felt like I was saying goodbye. This wasn't just cash. This was the winters I survived on a single rice ball for lunch, the overtime hours I worked until my back ached, the countless small sacrifices I had made for my son. This was my past. This was my life. This is it, then. It's really over. I murmured the words to myself as I tied the bag shut, gave a deep bow to the teller, and left the bank. The bundle of cash was heavy in my hands, but it was nothing compared to the hollowing emptiness that was spreading through my heart. From the bank, I went directly to a law office. It was a firm I had looked up beforehand, one that specialized in wills and estate planning for the elderly. "I would like to draw up a will," I explained to the lawyer who met with me. He was a kind, patient man who listened intently. I told him everything. About raising my son alone after my husband died. About scrimping and saving to send him to college. About the joy I felt when my granddaughter was born. And then, about the $150 and the conversation I had overheard the day before. The lawyer listened without interruption, just nodding quietly from time to time. And then I told him my decision. I will leave nothing to my son. Instead, I want this money. I want all of it to be donated to a charity that helps children who are truly in need. What I wanted, I said. And as I spoke the words, the tears finally came. Hot and stinging, was not to be a source of inheritance. All I ever wanted was to be his mother. The lawyer looked down for a moment, then met my eyes. I understand, ma'am, he said, his voice gentle. We will make sure your wishes are put into a form that will be honored. But even now, I haven't filed the original copy of that will. It's sealed in an envelope, tucked away in the very back of my desk drawer. Because there is still a part of me, a small, foolish part, that wants to believe. That wants to believe that somewhere, underneath it all, some real love remains. I thought that maybe, just maybe, they would. And that the day might come when my children would see me not as a wallet, but as their family once again. And so I decided that I would not simply wait. I would create the opportunity to find out with my own two hands. That opportunity, I knew, would be the final question I would ever ask them. I quietly steeled myself for whatever the answer might be. That afternoon, I sat quietly in my living room. On the coffee table, there was a single dish, a piece of slow-braised beef brisket, cooked just that morning from a recipe I hadn't used in years. And next to it, an envelope. Inside was the evidence that would become the key to my whole plan. Why did I do such a thing? The reason was simple. I wanted them to realize that I was not just a wallet. A few days earlier, I had arranged for an agent who specialized in investment and asset inquiries for seniors. He was, in fact, an old acquaintance of mine. I borrowed his professional title for an afternoon and sent him to Michael and Jennifer's house in the guise of a financial investigator. I was told he began the conversation in a calm, professional tone. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm here to discuss a parcel of land registered in your mother's name. It has recently become the subject of a geological survey for potential mineral deposits. According to our latest assessment, its value has skyrocketed to nearly $750,000. That was the bait I had set. I wanted to plant the seed of expectation in my son, the idea that this land held immense value. And I wanted him to see right through it, to ask me, "You're just doing this because you want the money, aren't you?" I couldn't bring myself to make the call myself. I was afraid that if they heard the tremor in my voice, if any of my raw emotion bled through, the entire plan would be meaningless. Instead, I went to visit my old friend. She used to work for the IRS, but now she was retired and living a quiet life. I stood on her doorstep and bowed my head deeply. "I'm so sorry to show up like this. I need to ask you for a favor." She took one look at my face and immediately ushered me inside. She offered me a cup of hot tea, but I couldn't bring myself to reach for it. My hands were shaking too much. In a quiet, trembling voice, I began, "You see, I'm not angry. Not really. I just, for once in my life, I want to hear what they're really thinking, their honest feelings." The moment I said the words, a single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. She was silent for a long moment, and then she nodded. "I understand. If you feel that strongly about it, I'll help you. But, are you sure about this? You could get hurt, you know." I managed a small, sad smile. "Oh, I know," I said. "I've already been hurt. More than enough." The next day, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a soft knock came at my door. I looked at the screen of my video doorbell, and my hand froze in mid-air. There they were, my son Michael wearing a tie, and Jennifer in a tasteful dress. In his hands, he held a beautifully wrapped box from a famous department store. I realized later it was a box of artisanal chocolates, a seasonal specialty. It was not the kind of thing they would ever normally bring to their own mother. I opened the door without a word. Jennifer immediately bowed her head deeply, speaking in a sweet, melodic voice, as if she had been the most respectful daughter-in-law from the very beginning. "Mom, we're so sorry to drop in unannounced. Thank you, really, for everything you always do for us." In that instant, I had to turn my face away slightly. A dull ache started to spread through my chest. I thought to myself, that isn't gratitude. That's the smile of someone who smells money. The words were too polished, the etiquette too perfect. They were like actors playing a part. Michael, too, bowed his head more deferentially than I had ever seen him do before, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. That silence, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. But what struck me most was the way they both held that deep bow for so long. Mom, I'm sorry for coming by so suddenly today. Please, could you just give us a moment to talk? I didn't answer with words. I simply led them into the living room. I brought out the brisket and set it on the table. I poured tea. I added a small dish of simple steamed green beans on the side. This tastes just like you used to make it when I was a kid, Michael murmured, and I could hear that his voice was shaking. Even without words, that plate of brisket held the memory of a taste I had made for my son countless times when he was small. The sweetness, the saltiness, the tenderness, it was all exactly the same as it was back then. I had practiced the recipe over and over, trying to get it just right. That evening, my son's eyes welled up with tears, and he put down his fork. Mom, about that land. His voice was hoarse. After the meal was over, I stood up and walked over to the small sideboard. There it was, the envelope I had prepared. Inside was a document I had typed up myself, made to look like the report from the investigator. I took out the contents of the envelope, returned slowly to the table, and said, "Please, read this." They exchanged a glance, then took out the report. With trembling hands, they also read the letter that was tucked inside. It said, "To my son, the land that is in my name is a piece of property your father and I bought together a long time ago. Axkelms. We always kept it safe, thinking, this will be for you someday. Dockip. But this past year, with the exchange of $150 each time, I began to wonder if you truly cherished me at all. That is why I created this illusion, this story of the land's value. I needed you to stop and ask yourselves a question. It isn't about money. It's about your hearts. Do you truly need me as a part of your family? Please, tell me the answer. Aish. Mom? Michael hung his head, and his shoulders began to shake. Jennifer was speechless, her words caught in her throat. She just stared at my face, nothing more. I just wanted them to listen, quietly. After handing them the envelope, I turned and walked slowly back to the kitchen to put the kettle on. From behind me, I heard the faint rustle of paper. I knew, instantly, that it was the sound of them opening my letter. A few moments later, I glanced back. Michael was standing there, stock still, clutching the letter to his chest. A single tear was tracing a silent path down his cheek. How many years had it been since I had last seen my son cry? Seeing him like that. A wave of emotion washed over me. But, as I watched him, I whispered to myself, in the quiet of my own heart, whether or not that tear is real, only your actions from this day forward will tell me. Michael carefully folded the letter and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then, without saying a word, he simply bowed his head and left. As I watched him go, I placed my hand on the side of the steaming kettle, taking a deep breath to calm my heart. Every step he takes from now on, I thought, will show me the true meaning of that tear. I have to believe that. That evening, I said nothing more before they left, but I could see that the expressions on their faces had changed completely. The words, "I'm sorry, Mom," had not yet reached my ears, but their eyes, and the tears he shed that day, I could feel that everything was shifting. And I whispered quietly in my heart, this is enough. If even a small part of my message got through, then this is enough. The night I finished writing that letter, I stood in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil. What would he think when he read it? To be honest, I didn't have any grand expectations. I just hoped with all my heart that it would reach him. In the letter, I had written, "Perhaps you were right all along. DXI, it's true I did own a piece of land. But it wasn't real estate, and it wasn't an asset. Ega. It was a place called a mother's heart, a place I had tilled and cultivated just for you. Now, that soil has become dry and barren, And the reason is not money. It was your silence, the day you stood by and said nothing when your mother was insulted. That was the thing that withered my heart more than anything else. 2. 3 days later, in the afternoon, the doorbell rang, and I walked slowly to the entryway. Standing on the other side of the door were Michael and his wife, and my little grandson Jason. The moment he saw me, Jason burst into tears and cried out, "I want to go back to Grandma's house. I want to be with you." His voice pierced something deep inside my chest, and for a moment, I couldn't find any words at all. That day, my son bowed his head to me, deeper than he had in years. He slowly sank to his knees, but he couldn't bring himself to look me in the eye. I could see his back, trembling slightly. Jennifer, beside him, also bowed her head low, her hands clutching the hem of her skirt so tightly that her knuckles turned white, as if she were trying to physically suppress the pain in her heart. I watched the two of them in silence for a long time, and then a wave of feeling washed over me. In them, I saw a reflection of my younger self. Of all the days I wanted to love someone, but had lost my way and didn't know how, I remembered myself as a young woman, how I cared so deeply for people but could only show it in clumsy, awkward ways. That scene, a conversation held not with tears but in silence, felt to me like the most profound dialogue we had ever shared. His voice was shaking, and his eyes were red and swollen. The school called. Jason got into a fight with another boy. I straightened, my back instantly alert. My grandson, in a fight? That quiet, gentle boy? Apparently, some kids were teasing him, saying things like, "You don't even have a real grandma." They said, "Your family just buys love with money, don't they?" Someone said something like that. Michael's voice caught in his throat. He struggled to continue, his words trembling. "Jason," he yelled, "my grandma isn't just someone who gives us money. She's kind to me." And then he hit the other boy. I felt my chest tighten. That my sweet boy. That he would go that far, that with his small body, he had been trying so desperately to defend my existence to someone. I brought a hand to my mouth and quietly lowered my eyes. From the depths of my heart, unshed tears began to well up, and I whispered to myself, all I ever wanted to give him was warmth, not money. What I had wanted to deliver was not the paper inside an envelope, but the warmth from every single strand of yarn in the little sweater I had stayed up all night to knit. His wife, too, knelt before me, struggling to hold back her own tears. She was a completely different person from the woman who had first entered this house, but I said nothing in that moment. I knew that if I opened my mouth, my heart would surely break. I led them into the living room, gently dried my grandson's tear-streaked face with a soft towel, and said quietly, "I'll make some tea." As I set the steaming teapot on the table, I asked myself, are these tears real? How am I supposed to respond to an apology offered so late? But just then, my grandson buried his face in my lap and whispered, "Grandma is the warmest." Oh. And with those words, the tears I had been holding back finally fell. I felt as if the dry, barren soil of my heart had just been touched by a few drops of rain. I still haven't forgiven anything, but I don't hate them either. I just realized that we all need time. To convey only that, I said quietly, "Welcome home." As I handed him a cookie, I felt the warmth of my grandson's hand in mine. For just a second, his small fingers squeezed my own. Ah, I am still here inside this child. Even if everyone else had come to see me as nothing more than a wallet, deep in this little boy's heart, his grandma was still alive. I whispered to myself, I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but this little hand, I will never, ever let it go again. In that moment, I felt something inside me quietly begin to change. Sunday mornings, I still wake up early. I stand in my kitchen, letting the aroma of miso soup fill the air, and I form 2 small rice balls. It's become my ritual. Inside, I alternate his favorites, pickled plum and salted salmon. I wrap them in a clean, though faded, cloth napkin. I tuck it gently into a tote bag, and I leave the house. This, perhaps, is my answer to all those days when I never received an apology. The feelings that couldn't be delivered with words, maybe they can be delivered through a warm meal. I tell myself this as I pass through the turnstiles at the station again today. And I think to myself, I am no longer paying with money, but with love. I am still paying every single day. The move was quieter than I had expected, a series of small, incremental changes. My new apartment is in a town, a couple of train stops away from my old one. When I get off at the local station, it's about a 5-minute walk. The familiar storefronts and the green of the park, just seeing them was enough to bring a sense of peace to my heart. The day I moved into the new apartment, I turned the key, opened the front door, and took a deep, quiet breath. It wasn't a large space by any means, but in the morning, a soft light streamed in through the east-facing window. Right next to that window is a small elementary school, and I can hear the sound of children's laughter carried on the breeze. Listening to that sound through the curtains, I whispered to myself, I feel like I've finally found my own place. Unlike the dead silence of the nights before, this place has the sound of life. The feeling that someone else is living, breathing nearby, that alone felt like a small salvation. On moving day, as I was packing the last of the boxes, I let out a soft sigh of anticipation. I wonder if I can live a little more freely from now on. I brought only the bare minimum of furniture. A low table and a floor chair, a small bookshelf, and a tiny stand just big enough for my teapot. And yet, just knowing that this was my castle was enough to fill my heart. One morning, I found a small cardboard box sitting in front of my door. As I picked it up, I noticed there was no sender's name written anywhere. I opened it to find it carefully packed with Honeycrisp apples, my absolute favorite. I didn't have to wonder who had left it. I knew instantly that he had brought it, quietly, without a word. It was the apology that could not be spoken. But the sweet, crisp scent of the apples seeped deep into my heart. There are apologies that can be understood without being said. Perhaps a mother is a creature who is meant to hear those silent voices. I quietly picked up one of the apples and slowly began to peel it. With the sweet tart fragrance, a gentle warmth spread through my chest. A week later, Michael and his wife told me, "You don't have to wait for the weekend. Please, let us know any time you want to see him." One evening, I left my apartment holding Jason's hand. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange, and as we walked along the small path by the park, my grandson whispered, "I love walking with you, Grandma." I smiled and gently stroked his head. "Thank you, sweetie. I'm happy to be walking with you, too." His small hand squeezed mine, and he said, matter-of-factly, "I love you the most in the whole world, Grandma." In that instant, I was at a loss for words. It wasn't a shout or a tearful plea. It was just a quiet voice, a voice that seemed to touch my soul directly. I stopped walking, and for several seconds, I just stood there, wrapped in the echo of his words. I felt as if the ice that had been building up in my chest for so long was melting away without a sound. With this one sentence from this child, I feel like I have been reborn as a mother. I etched his words into my heart and squeezed his small hand a little tighter. The warm, certain touch of life, that was the greatest gift I could ever receive. It was a more precious thing than the clumsy sweater I had poured my heart into, more valuable than the $150 payments, more priceless than $750,000. I no longer put $150 into an envelope and head to the station. What I pay with instead is the time we spend together, my grandson's words, the warmth of his small hand. When we sit on a park bench, he looks up at me with his big, clear eyes and asks, "Grandma, do you love me?" I smile and answer, "Of course I do." And in that moment, my heart is so warm that I think to myself, oh, this is more than enough. 2. My son and I still don't see each other often, but the other day, when we passed each other in the aisle at the grocery store, he looked at me and gave a small, deliberate nod. In that one brief moment, it felt as if all the words he couldn't say were contained in that simple gesture. You don't have to apologize anymore, I thought to myself, because I knew I had a certainty in my heart that he, through his actions and his son's words, now needed me as his real mother. At night, just before getting into bed, I open a photo on my phone. It's a picture of my grandson and me, from behind, holding hands and silhouetted against the setting sun. Looking at the photo, I whisper to myself, tomorrow, I will pay the same amount again. Not with money, but with love, a little at a time, every single day. And then, I softly close my eyes. This daily life of mine might not be what some people call normal. But for me, I don't think there could be anything happier. I pray from the bottom of my heart that this small, simple life and this unchanging love will continue forever. And with that thought, I fall asleep. Gazing at the evening sun as it streamed through my window, a thought occurred to me. Perhaps forgiveness isn't about grand pronouncements or tearful embraces. Perhaps it is simply the accumulation of small choices, the choice to accept that person again today. Since that day, Michael hasn't spoken about what happened. But the box of apples he left, the quiet sound of his footsteps as he brings Jason to my door for me, those have been more than enough words of action. Perhaps forgiveness isn't found in words, but in the actions we choose. When I came to that realization, I felt a warmth, like the first hint of spring, finally returned to my heart. Would you ever pay to be loved by your own child? Have you ever silently endured the pain, wishing just one more time to see your grandchild smile? If you have ever been taken advantage of in the name of family, please leave a comment and share your story. I don't need your gratitude. I just need you to realize that my love was real. If this story resonated with you in any way, please share this video. The bond of family is not a transaction. It is something that can never have a price tag.